afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Welcome to City Club. I'm Corleen Kraft, President-elect of City Club, and we're happy today to be co-sponsoring this important program with the League of Women Voters of Oregon and Portland. Our speakers today will be Chief Justice Wallace Carson, Jr., who is Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court, and Frances Baker, who is the President of the Portland League of Women Voters. Margaret Noel, for the season, otherwise known as Margaret Knoll, will be giving us some introductory remarks, and we're looking forward to presenting this program because it's something that Chief Justice Carson and I met with our, with Charlie, well, I'm losing his name, but may he rest in peace and may my mind revive. Thank you. Thank you. A few years ago on this very issue, and so I'm glad that we're able to bring it to you today. Before we begin our program, I have a few items of City Club business. Next Friday, December 19th, we will be having our annual holiday program, and I'm happy to announce that it will be held here. The Benson always treats us very nicely for that event. It will feature an excerpt of the Portland Center stage production of Santaland Diaries. In addition, a performance by the Top Deck Barbershop Quartet will be held. And that, as I said, will be held here, and you can reserve online at www.pdxcityclub.org. Now, in the area of media news, I wanted to bring a couple of things to your attention. Oregon Public Broadcasting has typically been rebroadcasting our Friday forums on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Well, they picked up a new program that will conflict with that. So we will, from now on, well, starting next Friday, actually, this program will be broadcast next Friday at 7 p.m. And on successive Fridays, we will be broadcast at 7 p.m., the same program that we presented that day, which means we can scoop the Saturday morning papers with our breaking news. The next media news concerns our new website, which we have launched. It's welcoming us to the 21st century. You can now join, contribute, make reservations, and pay online at a secure site. It's PayPal, so you can just go on and click away. I would also like to invite members of the League of Women Voters and the Oregon State Bar, who are here today in great numbers, to join the City Club. We think that we have a lot in common, and we would very much value your membership. I should also mention that the annual fund drive is still underway, and we have had contributions from 288 members, which is great, but not sufficient. I know there's a lot of competition for year-end dollars, but I would urge any of you who can help us out to do so. You can either pick up a card on your table or go online and just click, point and click, and secure site, put it on your credit card. I should also point out that this year we have joined with the Cultural Trust, and any amount up to $500 that you contribute to the City Club can be taken as a tax deduction when you contribute that amount to the Cultural Trust. Also, your dues here are all tax deductible except for $25. It's really a good deal. Oh, I would like to recognize, too, that those responsible for the creation of the new website, it's a firm of Stevie and Milius, and Gwen Milius is a member of our Board of Governors, and Studio Ridge LLC, and most of the work was done pro bono, and it's a lot of work. Web hosting is provided by TDR Technologies, and the site is supported by a contribution from Shields, Oblitz, and Johnson. I'd like to thank everyone involved for that very important contribution to the club. And finally, if you're searching for the last-minute perfect gift, think of giving a City Club membership as a gift. Again, you can go online and do it. It's a year-long gift of spiritual and, I'm sorry, perhaps so, but it should be intellectual, 'tis the season, intellectual stimulation and civic betterment. It's always a thrill a minute when I'm up here. Broadcast of the City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Pacificor, CH2M Hill, and Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt, and we're very, very grateful for their support. So now I would like to introduce Margaret Knoll, who will make some comments and introduce our other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Corleen, and I want to thank the City Club very much for presenting this program today. I also want to thank all of you for coming and to thank Justice Carson for coming to speak to us on the important topic of judicial independence. I have been a member of City Club for about as long as I have been active in the League of Women Voters, and I will do a little twist on what Corleen just said. I invite all of you to become members of the League of Women Voters, and we do have men members as well as women members since the 1970s. Many of you probably realize that the League of Women Voters and the City Club missions are very similar. We say that we encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government, and of course, pretty much that is the same as your mission, or the City Club's mission. Over the years, as a City Club member and a League member, I have served on a great many question writing committees for debates, because these are other cases where the League and the City Club have formed a natural partnership. I don't think I have often or ever helped with a debate on judicial candidates, and I hope to change that, because in the future we are hoping that City Club will partner with us in debates for judicial candidates. We in the League believe that people should know about the qualifications of the people they're voting on for judgeships, and in fact, in the next phase of this Judicial Independence project, we hope to sponsor debates for candidates for the Oregon Supreme Court. It's challenging, of course, to write questions for judicial candidates. We face that all the time with our voter's guide. And one of the reasons is because of judicial independence, because we can't ask questions about how a judge would rule on a particular case. We need to make sure that we honor the concept of judicial independence and the fact that the judge rules based on the law and not based on political pressure. We can and do ask a lot of questions about a judge's qualifications for the office and about ways in which the whole judicial system can function more effectively. And with that, I'm going to introduce Frances Baker, who is president of the Portland League of Women Voters and is a lawyer herself, and she will explain further the Judicial Independence project of the League of Women Voters.
Through the Judicial Independence Project of the League of Women Voters Education Fund, now in its third year, state and local leagues have been working together with the national office to assess the level of judicial independence in their states and to educate the community about campaigns locally. Last year, the League of Women Voters conducted a campaign watch of 28 candidates in 10 contested elections in the state in the May 2002 election. This year, we've been directing our efforts towards educating the public about the important role that the judiciary plays, the need to preserve a fair and impartial judiciary that is free to make decisions based upon law and the facts, independent of pressure of public opinion, partisan politics, and special interests. Since May, local leagues in Deschutes, Clackamas, Washington, Multnomah, Marion, Polk, Benton, Coos, Curry, Lincoln, and Douglas have presented more than 20 programs to the public. More than a dozen judges have accepted the League's invitations to speak at these presentations. They have discussed a wide range of issues, including the history of judicial independence in the United States and its meaning, the role of the courts in our government, the role of trial judges and the role of appellate judges, judicial selection, the role of politics and money in our judicial selection process, the effect of judicial elections on the independence of our judiciary. Today's presentation by Chief Justice Wallace Carson is the last event of the year in our Judicial Independence Project. This project has been supported by a grant from the Program on Law and Society of the Open Society Institute, a New York foundation. I would be remiss at this point if I didn't recognize Barbara Fredericks, who's in the audience, who is a member of the League of Women Voters of Portland, who has been the coordinator statewide for the Judicial Independence Project for the last 3 years, I believe, and she has done a tremendous job, and I'd like to acknowledge her. It is now my great honor and privilege to introduce to you our speaker, Honorable Chief Justice Wallace P. Carson, Jr. Justice Carson joined the Oregon Supreme Court in 1982 and became its Chief Justice in 1991. He was in the private practice of law from 1962 to 1977 and served as a Marion County Circuit Court Judge from 1977 to 1982. He was a member of the Oregon House of Representatives from 1967 to 1971, where he served as Majority Leader from 1969 to 1971. He then went on to the Oregon Senate from 1971 to 1977, serving as the Minority Floor Leader from 1975 until 1977. I'm tired just reading about all the things you've done. Chief Justice Carson's bachelor's degree is from Stanford University, and his law degree is from Willamette University School of Law, where he has served on the Board of Trustees since 1970. He was the chair of the Commission on Appellate Court Performance Standards for the National Center on State Courts. As Chief Justice, he is the administrative head of the Oregon Judicial Department. Justice Carson served in the United States Air Force from 1956 to 59 and the Air Force Reserve from 1959 to 1970. He is a retired Brigadier General in the Oregon Air National Guard, having served from 1970 to 1990. Please join me in welcoming our wonderful guest, Justice Wallace Carson.
Well, thank you very much, Francis. That was a lovely introduction. I'll try to live up to it. I'm pleased to be here, and when I think of introductions, a story that I've told probably too often is a story about William Howard Taft. And William Howard Taft was a heavy politician. He was heavy in maybe the popular sense because he's the only American who has been both President of the United States and Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He was heavy in the caloric sense. He weighed 325 pounds and had an immense girth. And one evening he had the displeasure of being introduced by a fellow by the name of Chauncey Depew. Chauncey Depew was a lawyer, and for reasons I have no knowledge, he had no use for the 27th President of the United States. So he introduced William Howard thusly: "Ladies and gentlemen, I present a man who has been pregnant in the past, is pregnant today, and will be pregnant in the future." Well, William Howard struggled to his feet and approached the rostrum as close as he could and said, "Thank you. If it is a boy, I shall call him George Washington. If it is a girl, I shall call her Betsy Ross. And if it's gas, what I think it is, I'll call it Chauncey Depew." So I've been waiting for somebody to refer to my girth, and I'm ready for him. I really am. It really is an honor, and Corleen and Francis and Margaret and my good friend George, thank you for allowing me to come here today. I give my standard disclaimers asked by members of the court that my remarks are mine unless I attribute them to the source, being a graduate of the Joe Biden School of Attribution. That may have, and so they're not necessarily, views are not necessarily shared by the members of my court then or now. And if you're up on your advance sheets, you've already reached that conclusion. At the end, we'll have questions and responses. I've often said that I've been in politics long enough to know that I don't say questions and answers because I know you will have questions for which I have no answer. But thanks to a good law training, I will have a response. And we'll go from there. Before I get to the text of my remarks, I want to extend my thanks and appreciation to the City Club, both the members and the staff. It's from time to time I have had a wonderful opportunity to work with them on, I remember one of the first chances I had was in the late 70s when the City Club did a study on the emergency board, which is, I'm not a fan of the emergency board then or now, although I did propose, or not propose, support a program that we would have annual sessions because that way we would not have an emergency board that was totally unrepresentative of the body itself or the state. Since becoming an administrative head of a Department of State, I think if the legislature, Mitch and others, came to town about every 10 years, ought to be about right. So your perspective does change. But not only for allowing me here, but for the reports that this group does and for the forums you provide for the community and for the state, for that matter, you provide a real service, and thank you, Corleen, and other people here for that. And to Francis and Margaret, the League of Women Voters has been around for a long time, and I've worked with them from time to time, and I too would applaud and did Barbara Frederick's for her work for putting this program, helping to put this program together, and another program that she was very strong in that the League sponsored, and that was our May 6th, 2000 Citizens Conference on the Courts. And Barbara was instrumental. That was chaired by Ellen Rosenblum, a judge in Multnomah County, and she did a fine job on that. So, and the League has been working to better inform the voters, as you heard mentioned, across the board for more important, and now they're looking, and I appreciate it, through the Judicial Independence Project, looking at judicial independence. What I'm going to feature on today is the judicial budget as a component of judicial independence. There are others, and they were mentioned. For instance, the election, appointment, retention of judges is a factor or a component of, in my view, of judicial independence. And there are others dealing with, mostly in the budget area, but there are other areas where it would have an impact on judicial independence. Now, there are many definitions. I selected two because I happen to agree with them, which a judge gets to do, mostly. Judicial independence, this comes from the National Center of State Courts, and they have a long piece on judicial independence. Judicial independence is the principle that judges should be free to use their best judgment to interpret and apply the law in without fear of punishment. When truly independent, judges are not influenced by personal interests or relationships, the identity or status of the parties to a case, or to external economic or political pressures. The principle is the core of judicial authority and extends to all functions of the court system that are necessary to exercise the constitutional judicial powers. A person I've met and I thoroughly enjoy is Shirley Abramson, who's the Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And earlier this year, she gave her turn on it, which I also think is valid. Although the phrase is hard to define, she says, the term judicial independence embodies the concept that judges decide cases fairly, impartially, and according to the facts and law, not according to whim, prejudice, or fear, the dictates of the legislature or the executive or the latest opinion poll. And I concur in that. Or as John Adams was quoted as saying when he enunciated the constitutional imperative, it is the right of every citizen to be tried by judges as free, impartial, and independent as the lot of humanity will admit. In my mind, there are several factors, as I've indicated, and judicial independence, and one of them is the budget. I maintain that one of my goals has been, with not much success, will be to achieve and maintain a sufficient and stable funding for the state court system, or for all court systems, but we're talking about the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, Tax Court, and Circuit Courts in this state. The importance of that, I think, can be found in Alexander Hamilton's Federalist 78. The executive not only dispenses the honors to show what my point I'm trying to make here is that we need your help, and I'll get back to that. The executive not only dispenses the honors, but holds the sword of the community. The legislature not only commands the purse, but prescribes the rules by which the duties and rights of every citizen are to be regulated. The judiciary, on the contrary, has not influence over either the sword or the purse, no direction either of the strength or the wealth of the society, and can take no active resolution whatever. It may truly be said to have neither force nor will, but merely judgment, and must ultimately depend upon the aid of the executive arm, even for the efficacy of its judgments. The judiciary is behind, this kind of offends me, but I think it's correct. The judiciary is beyond comparison the weakest of the three departments of power. that it can never attack with success either of the other two, and that all possible care is requisite to enable it to defend itself against the attacks. And then Anthony Kennedy commented not too long ago that judicial independence is threatened not just by active hostility, but by benign and unconscious neglect. And that's kind of the way I look at our budget woes that we've been suffering under for the last few years. So let me talk about sufficient and stable funding. Now, as I was preparing these remarks, the thought occurred to me that I'm kind of doing some Economics 101 or Judiciary 101, and particularly in front of this group, I don't mean to be patronizing or speak down to you at all, but I would like to get some common starting part. We used to have Susan Graver's judicial assistant when she was here, is now with her on the Ninth Circuit. A delightful person, and she told the story about 6 years ago. She learned it from her daughter about the householder who called 911 and said, "My house is on fire, my house is on fire." And the person, very calm person, said, "Well, let's calm down now, and you say your house is on fire?" And they said, "Yes, it is." And so the operator said, "Well, how do we get to your house?" And there was the long pause, and then the householder responded, "Well, duh, big red truck." And so that became kind of the mantra on the third floor when somebody would say something that was a little absurd or elementary. Well, duh, big red truck. So as I go through this, I would not be offended if I explain something that is so elemental that your children and grandchildren would understand it. You're free in solo or unison to say, "Well, duh, big red truck." So with that in mind, we'll move on. A context I need to just touch upon. Most of this is driven by the economy, in my opinion, and both national and in Oregon. We're not the only state that has had budget trouble. In fact, I think a majority of the states within the court system have suffered, and they've closed courtrooms and courthouses and done much of what we have. We tended to be the poster child because ours was a significant drop in funding, and we had to take over a 4-month period some rather draconian efforts to finish in the black, which fortunately the Oregon Constitution requires state government to finish in the black. I hate to think if we could print money too, which we can't. We led the nation in unemployment, reaching an 8.2. It has fortunately sagged down a little bit. We're still, I think, last I saw, above 7% unemployment, and that has an obvious consequence. We are an income tax state as far as funding the general fund, and that's the trough at which the court system stands. And so if there are no jobs, and we're still losing jobs in the Salem area big time, if there are no jobs, there's no income, and hence there's no income tax. That'd be appropriate to say, well, duh, big red truck right there, but that's the point. And then the legislative, for the most part, not all, and the public failure to understand the importance not only of an independent judiciary, but of a judiciary. It's a whole other discussion, but let me just touch on a couple of things. I think I can hopefully succinctly say what the problem is. A few years ago, I was invited to say a few words at the Classroom Law Project workshop that came down to Salem to study the legislative process. That's the Classroom Law Project is run out of Lewis and Clark College of Law, and it's an excellent program that deals with high school students primarily in moot court and constitutional matters. And your schools here in town several have been stars nationally, won national programs, Lincoln and I think Grant and Franklin, and I'm sure I'm missing some. It's a great program, but I was down there speaking, and a comment I made at the time to the educators that were there that in the building, Capitol building, and throughout the state, if I went up to a citizen or a legislator and said, "What do you think of the Federalist Papers?" their response would be, "I don't know, I take the Oregonian." Well, I used that for a while. I thought it was pretty clever. And I'd go out to service clubs and others and use it, and no laugh, nothing. And I thought, okay, it's not really a good joke. Or it's a good joke, but my delivery is no good. Or, and this is what I concluded, the problem is much worse than I ever envisioned. There is no clue out about how the Constitution is structured in the importance of a well and functioning, all three branches, but a well and functioning court system. And that was brought home 3 or 4 years ago when the state of Oregon put up its website. You'd go to the front page, and it had governor and links to the governor's programs. Then you had legislature and links to the legislative programs. Then you had agencies. And if you scroll down the list of agencies, right underneath of the Hazelnut Commission was the Judicial Department. That was sad, but it took us about 2 years to get it changed, and that was even sadder. Finally, this is from a different context, but I'm twisting it to make it work. Here is that there was a survey, it's apocryphal. The survey was being done in a community in Oregon, and the surveyor knocked on the door, and the householder came, and the surveyor said, what's the greatest problem facing the court system of the state of Oregon? Ignorance or apathy? Householder responded, I don't know, and I don't care. That pretty well sums up the dilemma, I think, we have. So let me move on. Last June, the Multnomah County presiding judge, Dale Koch, spoke to you about the perfect storm that we had been in and were in. I think it was June, may have been May. So I'm going to just refresh your memory on that, and some of you perhaps were not here. Then I'll move on to where we stand today. When the legislature left town on July 7th of 2001, we were in reasonably good shape. We didn't get all the money we needed or wanted, and that may be okay, because maybe we need more, or think we need more, or want more. But it was a good budget. But then after 5 special sessions, and you all recall those, they, some might say, trimmed our budget, or I would refer to it as cut or slashed. I have a little different view. Our budget by $50 million. It's politely referred around the Capitol building as a disappropriation. It hurts just as if it were a cut or a slash, but it's a disappropriation. The one that really hurt us was the last one, which was $13.6 million and had to be worked out over a 4-month period at the end of the biennium. And so we embarked upon, before the storm hit, the perfect storm hit, about September of 2002, it was obvious that our economy had tanked and was continuing to not return tax dollars to the general fund. I appointed a budget reduction advisory committee. Now, I wanted to call it the Doomsday Committee, but my professionally well-trained state court administrator, Kingsley Fick, thought of it as Budget Reduction Advisory Committee would be much better. So that's what it's called. That comes out, it's the acronym's BRAC, which is a little unhandy, but I used that, and those of you that have military experience, I know George can remember that military people just love acronyms, and they all go further. They turn acronyms into verb forms. For instance, one of the things some of you may recall, reduction in force, that's a RIF, and if you are the victim of a reduction in force, you have been RIFed. So we've been bracking our people around Oregon from time to time, and hope to avoid that coming this time. What we did then is we asked actually before 1991, we asked the presiding judges, and they are the lead judges in each of the 27 judicial districts. I know we have 36 counties, but some of the counties are combined. So we have 27 judicial districts, and they all have presiding judges. And they have, in some combination, trial court administrators, which are the operational or administrative side, and that individual works for the presiding judge. And we had them look at all the things we do and first come up with categories of the activity that we do. I would read them to you, but and I have them that I could do that. But we found first came up with 18, and then decided 2 of them were just process. They were not a case type. So we dropped it down to 16, and then I asked them to prioritize importance to Oregonians based on what they see in the trial courts. Prioritize the most important to still important, but the least important. And with the focus, 1, public safety, and child at risk. So they did that and came up with, as you might, serious personal felonies are at the top of the list, and then child delinquency and dependency and others, and it moves on down, and you get down to small claims and post-conviction, and some of the others at the bottom. That will become a little more important this biennium. I'll get to that in a moment. Then we had layoffs, I think more than any other branch, either of the two branches total. We had left unfilled some vacancies. Then we furloughed all our people, which again is a nice, poetic, gentle way of saying we made them work 4 days at 9 hours and cut their salary by 10%. We made the budget, and we were closed on Fridays because of the reduction of staff. Now this biennium, I would say that I use this, and for those of you who have heard my tired stories, when I was, as Francis mentioned, when my 1969, I was in the legislature, and Bob Smith from Burns, and later congressman, was the speaker, and he had a fellow working for him by the name of Al Jennings, and Al Jennings put together a kind of it's not a poem but in a sense, but a rhyming ditty on the bills. And I've dutifully kept that up over the last 30 years or so, and so I'll impose upon you the 72nd session, which overall, even though it went on until August 27th, the longest by far in the history of the state of Oregon, did some pretty good things. They introduced this is not a good thing. They introduced over 2,900 bills and passed 869, and the governor, surprise, surprise, vetoed only 7. So it was a pretty good bill, but they had bills They had bills on logs and dogs and cars and bars and fines and wines and tires and fires and trees and fees and guns and funds, annuities and gratuities and houses and spouses, horses and divorces, bicycling and recycling, ballast waters and facility squatters, performance audits and memorial plaudits, building codes and service roads, renewal stickers and retail liquor, payday loans and floating homes, toxic dumps and self-service pumps, noxious weeds and title deeds, claims, claims, and games, rules, schools, and pools, ports, torts, and courts. By the way, I have the bill numbers for you cynics out there. Ports, torts, courts, and sports, phoning, loaning, zoning, and cloning. Fortunately, thank you. Fortunately, most of those bills did not pass. Now, it's fortunate in two senses. One, you didn't do anything to deserve the passage of those bills, and they will be reintroduced in 2005 and become the basis of my list at that time. Okay, let's go to this biennium, and I'll wind up as quickly as I can. Again, we had a reasonably good budget. Again, not what we wanted or what we thought we needed, but a lot better off than where we started and where we sagged during the discussion over time. And so we were merrily going along, and then, of course, the economy failed to recover. And before the legislature left town, they, and I think correctly so, had a disappropriation bill. There's that word again. And what they did is they had add-ons. We had right at the end of the session, we had a $19 million improvement. That's why your filing fees went up 30%, because that was the money necessary to, and other costs went up to garner the money to shift it over our way from the general fund. And so we got up to fairly decent budget, and then the disappropriation peeled off that $19 million, or could have peeled off the $19 million they added. As it worked out, because the whole package was not referred, we have a $13.1 million hole that will be answered on February 3rd. We're planning for it not to pass, and so I will share with you, as we did before in the media, what consequences are likely to happen. It's a tentative plan. We met with the BRAC, or Budget Reduction, met yesterday, and under consideration, we have decided the furloughs will not be appropriate this time, and we will not have full court closures as we did last time. We intend to use the position vacancy savings over time to meet that, in part, that $13.1 million deficit. But with the reduced workforce, we can predict two unfortunate consequences. First will be an increasing and potentially significant delay in disposing of cases within the court system. We will use our priority list, as I've mentioned. The first 6 will go out first, as they say, will be handled first, have priority. The next 5, I think it is, will in second place, and the bottom ones, unfortunately civil, and I talked to a couple of you about that, civil lawyers, that civil practice lawyers, all lawyers are civil, let's hope, and, well, maybe not all. But civil is number 12. So the question is, will civil cases get tried? And my answer is, I hope. But they're in the risk zone of getting the cases tried. There are other mechanisms of arbitration, mediation, case settlement, and so on. But for really trying is the case is the ultimate use of the courts. That is going to be difficult. There is another aspect, in addition to delay, is the decay in the quality of the service when you have less staff, such as closures of the counters. They won't be open. We started this year hoping that we would be able to have every courthouse in the state open 8 to 5, including the noon hour. That lasted a very short period of time, and now we're trying to develop plans. And our hours are on the website, so you can find when the court is open. So that's the two bad parts. Now, long term, beyond February, we will continue the search for more efficient and effective ways to do the court's business, to do your business, actually. And we will try to develop a source of sufficient and stable funding. One of the things that there's some good things that came out of this. We're having better cooperation between the district attorneys and law enforcement and corrections and courts than we have had in the past. And we'll continue that discussion, because if a prosecutor sneezes, we hear about it. I mean, it affects our program, and if we don't get a case out, corrections at the local level and also the state has a problem. So we are linked together, and we knew that, and now we've had some demonstrated examples. But what we're going to try and do, I think, if I have my way, we will try to get a stable funding based on activity-based funding. I think California did that, or is doing that. And that, I think, is what the legislature wants us to do, because they invited us to set up performance standards for the court system, and we're busily working on setting performance standards from which they will measure our performance over time to see if we've met our goals, which then will become their goals. So we're kind of excited about that. It's a lot of hard work, but if it all works out, and they're based on the National Center for State Courts performance standards for trial courts. So let me conclude by saying what you can do, and this is, again, Big Red Truck. I would encourage you to support educational groups, which would include the public and the private school system, with your time and money, and encourage them to, in my time it was called civics. I don't think they teach that anymore, but make sure there is a discussion of government and why it's important. We have a program called the YMCA Youth and Government Program. It's around the state, but we involve about 300 students who come to Salem on a mini or mock legislature in February, and it's provided. I represented Salem High, I think 52 or 3 years ago, and when I tell the students this, I'm older than their grandfather, and a little relating problem, I suppose, but that's a good program. The Classroom Law Project, and also where you could be of support. You have a good Multnomah County bar here who's been supportive of our judicial plight, and the judges here in Multnomah County and elsewhere, but Multnomah County judges have done a marvelous job. They had an outreach program. And last I heard, and they exercised it particularly during the 4 months that courthouses were dark, went out and spoke to service groups and schools and a variety of other things. And last I heard, it was something like 49 events, and they're still doing it. And Jerry LaBar is the chair of that outreach committee, but all of them have participated in. They have a meet the judge one day in a mall. I think the last one was out at Lloyd Center. So they get it, and they're reaching out to the community. You may offer some other ideas that improve your court system, and we're open to that, and whatever we can get. And also work with community leaders, educating the young and the old about the importance of the judiciary to the democracy. Without adequate funding, the access to justice will be hampered across the board. Expedition and timeliness impaired, and equality, fairness, and integrity threatened. We shall continue working toward a justice system for the future, for all of us. It's rock solid, secure, and enduring for generations to come. Thank you very much, and I will attempt to respond to your questions.
As you may know, the privilege of asking questions of our speakers is typically reserved for City Club members only, but because the League is co-sponsoring with us today, we also invite you to ask questions. And of course, our Constitution team members from Lincoln High School are members as well. George Van Humison was former Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court, so appropriately, Justice Van Humison will have the privilege of asking the first question today. As the speakers are responding to his question, if you would please line up behind this microphone so that you can ask questions and identify yourselves when you ask them, and please make every effort to remember who are the experts and who are the questioners, and hold your question at 30 seconds. Thanks.
Thank you, Corleen. Chief Justice, let me extend my own personal welcome to you here today. We served together on the Supreme Court for, I believe, 12 years, and I can say without hesitation that it was a thoroughly enjoyable experience. You are a gentleman and a professional in the best sense of the words. I'm going to resist the temptation to throw a softball to you. I'm not going to ask you, how do we increase the pensions of retired judges? The judicial branch of government, some people take a very myopic view of that and think it's just a bunch of judges, but it is much larger than that. The judicial branch of government includes a host of partners. So my question is, what would the defeat of Measure 30 in February do to the judicial branch of government in the broadest sense, including public defenders, the defense bar, legal aid, the police, district attorneys, all of the social agencies, the mental health agencies, CASA, court-appointed mediators that are in some of the courts, the juvenile departments, the domestic relations departments. What would be, in your best judgment, the effect of the defeat of Measure 30 in February on the judicial branch in the largest sense of the word?
Thank you, George. Let me offer, I could go on for a long time. I'll be brief for me. The obvious ones are the hampering of access and a variety of doing our performance. Some of the targets, of course, will be disappropriated are, I think, state police and their forensic labs, corrections, of course, the court system, and then there's a piece on health and education and a variety of other things. And we are interrelated. For instance, the Oregon Health Plan provides for about 70% of our people the service providers for our drug courts around the state, which are very successful. They started in Oregon here. It was the second, and I think Carl Haas was probably the one who started it first, and they've had great success. National audits have indicated it is one way to deal with with both drug and alcohol addiction, and it's successful, not just the turnstile that we're used to, but the health plan pays for it, and if they don't pay for it, there are no provider, will be lessened providers. Let me just, so it's across the board. You can imagine any place that we're interlinked, that linkage could be broken if we're not funded or if they're not funded. So we have an interest in funding the other parts or not unfunding the other parts. Let me speak. Jim Hennings is here, and he and I spent yesterday afternoon together with the Public Defense Services Commission. When we went through the first storm, the defense community, the indigent defense, was embedded in the judicial department. It's part of the responsibility of the judicial department. We've been trying for over 15 years to have that moved out, no offense to the defenders or the program, but we deemed it to be a significant conflict to have the judges actually controlling the purse strings for the defenders. And so we were successful with a lot of help. Well, the legislature was very gracious, and on 1 July of this year, all the responsibility for indigent defense transferred over to the Public Defense Services Commission, headed by Barnes Ellis, a Portland attorney, fine chair, and an outstanding commission. And Peter Ozan is our executive director. We met yesterday to determine what's going to happen. That $13.1 million that we're going to be slashed is a $9.9 million for indigent defense. We had, you may be familiar with what we did. We stopped prosecuting non-person misdemeanors. That sounds, well, that may not mean much, but to the community, it's horrible, because that's where the shoplifting and the non-violent auto thefts and all the fraud things are in that non-person misdemeanor category. Had some really difficult community problems. We had one person in Marion County who within a short period of time was arrested 5 times for stealing cars. In fact, the last one he was arrested on was 4 hours after he was released from the 4th car he had heisted. So we're talking about how we're going to deal with it. Tentatively, we're looking that we're not going to do what we did last time. It worked for the 4 months. It will not work for 14 months or 12 months, and that is stop appointing. So we'll probably, and the judges appoint, but the PDSC, the Public Defense Service Commission, will probably continue to fund it until we run out of money, which my prediction is sometime in April of next year, not, 05. And there will be no appointments, and that's from the worst crime to the least crime, and that's going to have significant impact on the community. The good news is the legislature will be in town, and I hope that maybe you can help us convince the legislature that they don't have a choice in this. That's rough talk. Mitch, forgive me, take it in the sense I gave it. But Gideon versus Wainwright 40 years ago, in fact, on March 18th, I helped OCDLA, Oregon Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, celebrate the 40th anniversary of Gideon versus Wainwright, the one that established the person charged with a crime for which he could be incarcerated is entitled by the U.S. Constitution to have defense counsel. In the morning, we celebrated the 40th anniversary, and that afternoon, I met with Ann Christian, our then head of our indigent defense, and to slash more money out of the budget. Just expected to get the Hypocrite of the Year award for that activity, but it may come yet. The year isn't over. If there are other questions, I'll go, but I'll stop. I'm sorry, it's too long. Please.
Chris Smith, City Club member. I'm happy to say I don't interact with the court system very often.
I'd probably do it.
But I have interacted with your court when I was part of a group that appealed the ballot title. And I am curious, as you've ranked the judicial services, where cases around the initiative system fall on your priority scale.
In ours, the point that I need to make is that the 2 appellate courts, the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, have a different way of catching up on their dollars, and we have not prioritized the cases we get. Now that is a little misleading because the pronoun "we" is not important. It's pronoun "they," and the legislature has prioritized. I think there are 8 or 10 that they have told us to do first. Now we'll try to do the best we can, but can't do all of them at once. And so on initiatives or anything else, we will take them in the order that they come to us. And as long as we have staff, now we're going to be losing some staff too, so it's going to take us a little longer, probably, to get our job done. And in the Court of Appeals, they have no choice. You have, by statute, an appeal right, but you don't go through initiatives, don't go through, or ballot titles don't go through the Court of Appeals. So I would anticipate the worst would be the same order, but we'll be slower. And some may say, well, how can that be? And it can be, yeah.
Not always a bad thing.
No, it depends on what side, yes.
Thank you.
You bet.
Bill Savage, City Club member. Looking at judicial independence a little bit broader, could you comment on what you feel is the best way for judges to be selected, voting or appointment, and which helps to create most independence in terms of the judgments they have to make?
That's a very difficult question, and my mind is still working on it. I haven't, for a long time, I wanted elections. I grew up in the election system as a legislator, and I was comfortable with it. In 1977, I resisted, but the legislature approved sending out a ballot measure for the Missouri plan, which is a appointment retention election program. And it was clubbed, I think, 3-1 or something like that by the voters in 1978. And I understand it's not even being used fully in Missouri. It's the one that allows things like the Rose, whatever her name was, Berg, thank you. So it was designed, it was sold to the legislature, and it's less dirty and less expensive. And then within 10 years, Rose Bird came along, I think, and it's the dirtiest and the most expensive. My own view would be, and we had one, and this is a change. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have said I still want to stay in elections. But if we have, and Max Williams proposed this, and I rejected it not out of hand, but I was willing to stay with elections. If we don't pick up Senate confirmation, and they've had a bill in the last 3 sessions to have, in addition to being appointed, going through that and being elected, you have to go through and get the Senate confirmation. Apparently that's taken, it's done so well on the national level, they wanted to do it in the state level. So my view would be that a blue ribbon, if you will, commission that would submit a list to the governor from which he or she would appoint would be the appropriate way. Now, if we could stay with elections, the reason I'm shifting is because the elections that I knew have shifted badly. They're becoming, the last several elections have become wholly expensive, I mean just hugely expensive, and they've turned mean, really nasty. Not by the 2 candidates necessarily, but by their supporters or the people that have an interest in seeing one or the other being elected. If that continues, then we are going to, in my view, at least the state level, I think there's some hope that at the local level we'll be able to have elections and that sort of stuff. But on the state level, we may want to go to, the people may want to go to a election or an appointment retention system. Your question.
Good afternoon, Irvin Mandel, City Club member. You've presented a very clear and scary picture about the relationship between the whole justice system and funding. It is clear and is scary. However, I'm having a little trouble relating that to the ostensible topic of today's discussion, that is judicial independence. You first begun speaking about it really now in answer to the last question. Perhaps I'm missing something, but could you relate that for me?
Well, what I staked out, for good or evil, a thing that I refer to as a component of the budget. You can destroy judicial independence by underfunding it. And that was the message that apparently I didn't get across, but that's where I'm coming from. And others talked about it. You can do it by elections, the kind of elections you have. That was that question. And there are other ways that you can undermine. For instance, there was a practice, I didn't notice that this session, but last session, to punish the judges because, particularly public judges, because they had written an opinion that one or more powerful legislators didn't like. Congress is doing the same thing. Every time when Ted Goodwin wrote the opinion, Ted Goodwin from Eugene, Supreme Court, and here and Ninth Circuit, wrote an opinion on taking under God out of the Pledge of Allegiance. The Congress just went berserk in trying to get at the judges, impeach them, which you can do, and is proper. But even here in Little Quiet Salem, there were those who were going to punish us for exercising our independent judgment on a given case. And that can be really threatening, and that's going on at the national level. So if you bend to it, if you say, okay, well, gee, I don't want them to do this, I want my salary increased. That was one of the things that was issued, was by golly, they're not going to get a salary improvement. And of course, as I mentioned, a friend that at the same time we had a law clerk that left and came to work here, very good person, very bright, and she started a salary in a Portland firm at $27,000 higher than my salary. And so they can play with the purse, but they get to have the purse, and so that's the way it operates. Now, that will change, and I should have mentioned on the election on the White versus Minnesota, so the Supreme Court, I think unfortunately, said we now can tell you how we're going to vote so that you can really get a sense what do you want me to be on the Supreme Court. I won't tell you how I'm going to vote because I don't know how I'm going to vote. So that'll be played out too. Anything else?
No, these were the very issues that I had looked forward to hearing a discussion about. The budgetary problems throughout this state and Multnomah County and the city are fairly well known, I would think, particularly by the members here. But thank you anyway for the last bit.
Well, I'm sorry I gave the whole speech in 3 minutes, but thank you for your question. Yes, sir.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. Generally, I'm expected to ask questions about transportation, but I think I'll pass, really. I think this is much more important. My question to you, Your Honor, is, in my view, I think the biggest threat to independence and democracy is money. Too much or too little. And I wonder if, I'm not sure that you want to answer, but if you do, I think I would appreciate it. Probably it's your personal opinion. Can democracy survive money? And if so, how?
That's a tough question, and one of the things I have to be careful about is, as if you've been paying attention, Anthony, one of the reasons that White versus Minnesota is a bad case, wrong, and that is saying that the judicial rule that says that judges can't comment on cases that are pending or likely to be pending, that's a good rule. It's gone now, and we're taking a look. Skip Durham, a member of the court, has a committee taking a look at what we have to do to maybe change ours to comply with the edict of the U.S. Supreme Court. But it got Anton Scalia caught in it, as you may have noticed. He had a comment several months ago, and then the case came up, and he recused himself. Now, if they get really vocal out there on the stump, we're going to see probably, it's always 5-4, but it'll be 4-3 or 3-2 or something like that. So one needs to be very careful about what you say. The position I've been in for election politics since I was in the legislature, not so much based on Constitution, but based on the idea that there's so many ways of getting around dollars. For instance, shoe leather doesn't cost the campaign anything, but is very effective. As this city kind of was one of the first with Bob Packwood and Neil Goldschmidt on going door to door. Very effective campaign. Almost no cost to that, and almost no reported cost to that. So there are ways of, I say, getting around it, but there are other alternatives. Somebody said, I've forgotten, what is it? Money is the mother's milk of politics. What I opted for, or something like that, what I opted for was that reporting, and if somebody spends out-of-state money or spends $1 bazillion and it's reported before election, that Oregonians know how to handle that. If they don't want big money, then they know what to do with it and vote for the other person. And that worked, I think, for a while. Now, so much of it isn't reported that, I don't know. So the Supreme Court yesterday or the day before changed its position on limits on free speech connected to campaign contributions. We had a case 10 years ago that the legislature tried to pass some limits, and we said no. We were looking primarily at the U.S. Supreme Court case that interfered with free speech, and by a 5-4 decision, again with Senator Day O'Connor being a swing vote. Now I haven't read the opinion, but I will. It now appears that Congress can put some limits. Where that will go with us, I have no idea.
We have time for one last question, about 1 minute. Thank you.
My question is about ethics. Throughout society and major institutions, on Wall Street and newspapers and elsewhere, we see breaches of ethics, which really raise into question our trust in them. So my question to you is, within the judiciary, how vulnerable do you think our system in Oregon is, and what could be done about it?
Declaring a bias, obviously, an obvious bias, and that is the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of both judicial ethics and lawyer ethics. And so we're up to our nose in the discussions about the subject matter. Let me speak to judicial ethics. I like to think, and I believe it to be true, that we have a clean court system in Oregon, and unlike Chicago or some of the other places in years past, we have no, gray lord, I think they called it when they did a sting on the judges there. We're pretty transparent in Oregon. Fortunately, we're not so big that you can get away with much. Not that we would try, but I have a very high regard for lawyer ethics. There are some who do not comply, and I have a high regard for the way the judges are responding to their ethical challenge. I may be wrong. Okay, there's a Commission on Judicial Fitness and Disability, and it has 3 citizens appointed by the governor, 3 lawyers appointed by the bar, and 3 judges appointed by the court. And they do hear, and they have a lot of complaints. Most of them are over rudeness, which I've been trying to work on, but they do have complaints, and we have defrocked a few judges, and we have suspended a few, and we have reprimanded a few. But I like to think that we're pretty clean. But time will prove whether I'm right or wrong, but I think we're okay.
Thank you very much, all of you, today, and we will see you here next week for our holiday program. We're adjourned.